The Good Old Grateful Deadcast, the official podcast of the Grateful Dead. I'm Rich Mahan with Jesse Jarnow, exploring the music and legacy of the Grateful Dead for the committed and the curious. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Deadheads, welcome to Season 11 of the Good Old Grateful Deadcast. I'm your co-host, Rich Mahan. Thank you so very much for tuning in. In this episode of the Good Old Grateful Deadcast, we continue our exploration of the upcoming Grateful Dead box set, Enjoying the Ride. Up today, we travel east, back across the country to look at shows in Enjoying the Ride from the East Coast. We want to extend a hearty thank you to everyone who pre-ordered Enjoying the Ride. It is now officially sold out. Thank you very much. But you can still grab great music from the set by digging into The Music Never Stopped, which distills Enjoying the Ride into a shorter route through the band's Diamond Anniversary celebration. Featuring at least one song from every venue in the deluxe set, it offers a briefer but no less illuminating journey through the music that shaped the Grateful Dead's live legacy. It will be available on May 30th from Rhino.com on 3 CDs, 6 LPs, and digitally. Also recently announced is a brand new Grateful Dead Greatest Hits, a perfect entry point for the budding Deadhead in your life, and a great single disc addition to your collection. Grateful Dead Greatest Hits will be available as a single CD or LP and comes out on June 13th. Make sure to visit dead.net for more info on both of these not-to-be-missed releases. Head on over to dead.net/deadcast to check out all of our past episodes, including the complete seasons 1 through 10 and all of our episodes up through season 11 at this point. You can link through from there to your favorite podcasting platform so you can listen how, when, and where you want to listen. Please help the Good Old Grateful Deadcast by subscribing, sharing an episode with your friends on social media, hitting that like button, and leaving a review. Thank you very much. Do you have a great story you'd like to share? Do it at stories.dead.net and record yourself telling about that epic road trip, the time you met your significant other, the funniest thing you ever saw while on tour. You may just hear yourself on a future episode of the Deadcast. We have transcripts from many of your favorite Deadcast episodes available for your reading and research pleasure. Head on over to dead.net/deadcast-index and check them out. Those who have been to Dead shows on the East Coast say they have a unique flavor all their own, much different from West Coast shows. And in this episode, part 1 of our look at the great East Coast venues included in the new box set Enjoying the Ride, we dive into some of those epic shows that happened at 6 classic East Coast venues the Dead frequented. Who better to walk us through these than East Coaster Jesse Jarnow? Got my chips cashed in, I keep trucking like I did on man. Together, coalescing in line, just keep trucking.
As any Dead freak can surely attest, the lyrics of Truckin' represent the United States with 100% cartographical accuracy.
Heroes in the end, like flashing my keys on Main Street. Chicago, New York, Daytona, it's on the same street. Your typical city involved in a typical daydream. Hang it up and see what tomorrow brings.
And if you hook a left from there, you can head straight down the Mississippi River to the Gulf of Mexico. But the Grateful Dead most frequently barreled due east. On the new Enjoying the Ride box, about half of the shows come from up and down the eastern seaboard. So that's where we'll be heading for the next 2 episodes.
New York, got the ways and means, just won't let you be. Oh no, no.
We've been listening to the September 16th, 1987 Truckin' from the new box. We've said it before and we'll say it again. Though the Grateful Dead were a Bay Area band, Deadhead fandom was almost certainly more intense in the Northeast, and one place in particular. Next time Ramble on Rose comes on, any version at all, listen to the cheer after this line.
Just like New York City, just like Jericho.
That version was from Nassau Coliseum, March 16, 1973. part of the time-honored tradition of fans cheering for their city, or something close to it. But almost no matter where the Dead played Ramble on Rose, there were audible cheers for New York. Here they are at Winterland in March 1977, also from the new box, where New York gets cheers on the other side of the country. They're not as loud as they are on the East Coast, but they're there.
Just like New York City, just like Jericho.
By the time Grateful Dead archivist and legacy manager David Lemieux began catching the Dead in the later 1980s, the band was playing some of the biggest places in which it was possible to perform live music. Welcome back, your friend and ours, David Lemieux.
Coming from where I come from, where we don't really have traffic or big stadiums, I remember some of the East Coast stadiums, Foxborough, RFK, Buffalo, the main big stadiums, Giant Stadium. Giant Stadium actually wasn't too bad, but I remember the traffic getting into some of these places was excruciating. And as somebody who just wanted to be in the parking lot, who just wanted to be in line at the taper section to get in, it was terrible.
Just like New York City, just like Jericho.
That was the Dead at the 76,000 capacity Giant Stadium in New Jersey in 1987, now on the Giant Stadium box set. 20 years, 1 month, and 11 days since their New York City debut for a considerably smaller crowd. That was probably the longest fragment of audio from the Grateful Dead's New York debut at the Tompkins Square Park Bandshell on June 1st, 1967, before opening their week at the Café A Go-Go. Even before they played New York, the Dead were greeted as liberators, welcomed with a parade down St. Mark's Place, where they were presented with a key to the city made out of carnations. During their 2-week stay, they played a residency at the Café A Go-Go, as well as shows at the Cheetah, on Long Island at SUNY Stony Brook, and the first of several free shows in Central Park, all the beginning of the Dead's New York strategy. That strategy being, play New York frequently. They returned to New York twice more before the end of 1967, playing at the Village Theater over Christmas, where it snowed through the roof. During our U.S. Blues episode, we spoke with crew member Richie Pechner about that early New York trip.
It was kind of mind-blowing to see how the band resonated with the people on the other side of the country, at least for me. I mean, I think they'd been there one time before. They did some shows before that, but that one was pretty remarkable. One of the things I remember was it was pretty cold, and we all had to go out and buy underwear because, of course, we were from the Haight-Ashbury. we weren't wearing underwear at that point.
Over the previous few years, the Village Theater exhibited one of the most adventurous booking policies of any venue in the country, ranging from Chuck Berry to Lenny Bruce, the Bread and Puppet Theater to the Penny Whistlers, the Yardbirds to some of John Coltrane's final New York performances. And in 1968, Bill Graham took over the joint.
If you're puzzled by the hypnotic effect that today's rock musicians have on the young, not just on their taste in music, but on their fashions, their manners, and morals, spend the next several minutes with us in New York's East Village at a place called Fillmore East.
By the time Bill Graham moved in, the Dead had played the short-lived Palm Gardens, the Columbia campus in solidarity with striking students, and the Electric Circus.
There are 2 performances on concert night at 8 and 11:30. The management calls this young 8 o'clock crowd the bubblegum set.
We spent a lot of time hanging out at the Fillmore East during various episodes of the Deadcast, especially on our Fillmore East Late Show bonus episode in our 3rd season, which we've linked to at dead.net/Deadcast. Here's what the Dead's tour manager and our late correspondent Sam Cutler told us in 2021.
We did that many times in a year in New York. We didn't go to New York and play 2 dates in a year. You know what I mean? On the basis of like, oh yeah, scarcity is the way to promote a band. No, it's not. Availability is the way to promote a band. And the Grateful Dead loved New York, of course, because, you know, there's that certain kind of flash thing of New York that is different from, we're so cool and we're so laid back, we can hardly speak. The kind of West Coast thing, you know what I mean? We're so indie. New York's, yeah, man, this is us. The Big Apple, we're ready, let's conquer it. You know what I mean? There's a whole other kind of mental gestalt going on in New York, you know. There was in those days anyway.
To the uninitiate, the Fillmore sound is deafening. The amplifiers turned up almost to infinity, the colored lights playing on the backdrop in psychedelic suggestion seem to stun the young crowd, to mesmerize them. They sit quietly in uniform, dressed alike, hair cut alike in the anesthetized attention they give the performers. Tonight, the Grateful Dead and their rock and blues heroine, Janis Joplin.
It took the Dead about a year and a half to work their way up to a headlining slot at the 2,600 capacity Fillmore East, taking over top billing by the end of 1969. In 1970, the Dead played the New York area relentlessly, headlining the Fillmore East in January, February, May, July, September, and November. Here's Jerry Garcia speaking to Dennis McNally, now in the Jerry on Jerry audiobook, available from Hachette, which we've linked to at dead.net/deadcast.
When Bill opened the Fillmore East, then our fortunes took a turn for the better. You know, then we started riding in limos, and we were starting to do well. Not our records or anything, but our shows were doing well. And in New York, I mean, once you make a splash in New York, once you've got a New York audience there, it's like you could own the town. In New York, we could do any fucking thing.
They bonded especially with the Fillmore East stage crew, including Allan Arkush, who we've spoken to extensively over the years.
This was like the lab for them because there was no time limit. And they could play all they wanted. And it became a really common thing for Jerry to come early with an acoustic guitar and hang out with the stage crew and play guitar, you know, and we had a bunch of guitar players on the stage crew. So that, it became a very friendly give and take atmosphere.
The Dead earned a reputation for playing long and late, though Howie Levine adds an asterisk to this frequent anecdote.
For all of the hype about how the band would play until 6 o'clock in the morning, the shows I were at, by the time the show ended, people had left. They had enough. It was 4 hours of music already. You turned around at the end of a show, and it was half, 2/3 full. People had left.
In early 1971, the Dead began to record what became Skull and Roses by booking 6 nights at the Capitol Theater in Portchester, a venue we'll discuss momentarily. But the recordings didn't go as planned.
Mickey's still under the weather.
In the end, most of Skull and Roses was tracked at the Fillmore East over 5 nights in April.
Bob and Betty established a recording booth under the stage. The equipment crew struggled for the last time with 3 tons of shit that feels like 40. And the road manager's back at the hotel spewing his heart out and sure he's going to die behind all the changing plans. Everyone's dead on their feet, but incredibly ready to play.
I had to move, really had to move. That's why, if you please, I am on my bended knees. Bertha, don't you come around here anymore.
Grateful Dead archivist David Lemieux.
We've released a lot of Fillmore East music. Back in 2000, when we did the Ladies and Gentlemen, the Grateful Dead 4 CD set, we'd really considered doing all 5 nights as a box set. We had our package design company produce a cube that held 5 digipacks of 3 CDs each and a booklet, and we really put a lot of thought into that, but the multi-tracks had enough problems that we couldn't do it. There were some vocals that had been erased. There were some things, some cuts, some things like that. So we kind of decided to instead do the 4 CD set, but every night, April 25th to the 29th is up there with the best of 71. So it's not like these are lesser nights.
April 25th, now on Enjoying the Ride, was opening night of what became the Dead's final run.
You very much get the Fillmore East sound and vibe and the band feeling extremely comfortable playing this place. I've listened to, I think, every recording that's known from the Fillmore East, and there is a certain sound. It's similar to the way the Family Dog in San Francisco has its own sound, just in terms of the way the band reacts to the audience.
In New York, the Dead could dish it right back, both musically and otherwise. This was one of Steve Silberman's favorite pieces of banter.
Where were all you Dockstop people 2 years ago when we were playing it all the time? Too bad, man, too bad.
But where Ladies and Gentlemen, the Grateful Dead, and obviously Skull and Roses come from the multi-track reels, the April 25th and April 27th recordings on Enjoying the Ride come from the 2-track tapes recorded and mixed in real time by Betty Cantor, intended as work tapes for the band to review while picking highlights for the album.
We went to the Betty boards, which we felt, the multis do sound incredible. There are some recording problems, and those were a couple of the nights that had a few things where there were a few vocals of songs that had been erased. I think in anticipation of overdubbing them for possible Skull and Roses release. So unfortunately, some of those tapes are not usable, but the Betty boards sound incredible.
I know you're right, gonna miss me when I'm gone. Gonna miss your baby from rolling in your arms. Hey, hey.
By early 1970, the New York Dead crowds were starting to catch on, as Gary Lambert told us in 2023.
When those tickets for Fillmore East went on sale, I remember two things distinctly. I was indignant that the Dead were getting big enough that I couldn't automatically wind up somewhere in the first 10 rows.
And by early 1971, they were absolutely ravenous. Please welcome back Howie Levine, who made sure he got tickets for the band's Fillmore shows when they went on sale earlier that month.
I go into school Monday morning, and I see my friend Adam, and I said, hey, you want to go see the Dead? They're playing the Fillmore. He goes, yeah, sure. I said, well, great. We should go down and wait for tickets. And we get to the Fillmore, and there's like 4 people online in front of us. The box office opens like noon, and we're there at 11 o'clock. Tickets start going on sale for the next show. And we get to the front of the line, and we turn around and we say to the people behind us, oh, you can go. And they say, you're not buying tickets? And we said, no, we're buying tickets. Well, why don't you want them? I said, no, we're buying tickets for Grateful Dead. These are tickets for Procol Harum that are going on sale now. And the Dead tickets go on sale on Wednesday.
As the miller told his tale, that her face at first just ghostly turned the wider shade of pale.
And I'm standing with Adam, who's going, you didn't tell me they're going on sale on Wednesday. I said, so what? We'll hang out. And we hung out for 2 days. The funny thing was, about 30 minutes later, there were people behind us waiting for Dead tickets. And we wound up staying there for 2 nights. And my friend Artie, luckily, took us in so we could sit inside the lobby doors because it was freezing. And I was, sometime in March, it was freezing at night. And we wound up playing bridge all night. Tickets, went on sale on Wednesday. And of course, there's, this huge line around the block now. We bought first row center for Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday. Bought for ourselves, bought for friends on Sunday, bought for friends on Thursday. Wound up buying the max or 20 tickets.
Though Howie and his friends didn't know it yet, the April gigs would be the Dead's last shows at the Fillmore East. Bill Graham had decided to close the Fillmore's East and West at the beginning of the summer of 1971. Here he is talking to KQED in 1974.
Fillmore's took up all of my life during the 65 to 71. I was married in 67. My work became my mistress. The marriage broke up simply because my love and adulation went to the work. And I found myself in 71 looking at the audience and looking at the stars and saying, this year I made 39 round trips to New York and back.
The rock business was changing, and the artists Bill Graham had been booking for the previous half-decade were starting to graduate to bigger venues.
Sometimes you make major decisions, not because some major thing happened. It's like a balloon. You'll take this and that, and then a little prick of the balloon, you break. Well, I broke. And they were closed simply because I wasn't happy anymore.
Bill Graham wouldn't announce his decision to the world until the final day of the Dead's run. so only the crowd on Thursday the 29th knew it was the Dead's last time through, unless they had some inside dope.
There was enough excellent material from 425 and 427 that hadn't been released. And so we put a lot of work into it. We listened to these shows and put a lot of work to find kind of a 3.5 hour batch of incredible music from the first and third nights of this 5-night run and put it together that way. Bertha, all these songs that they had debuted at the Portchester were really well developed by this point.
I had a hard run running from the window. I'm on and running. I'm on there.
The opening night was terrific. Literally, I had the Dead center seats. We picked those two in the front row. I had my head stuck between the monitors almost the entire night. Here's Jerry's and Bob's monitors. I said, this isn't bad.
Standing on tower, well, at my command. You just keep turning while I'm playing in the band. If a man among you got the sin upon his hand, let him cast on and keep playing in the band.
You know, there's a good amount of Pigpen on these 3 CDs. Listen to Hard to Handle. I always feel that the Hard to Handle peaked from April 71 through August of 71.
Baby, here I am and I'm made up on the scene. I can give you what you want, but you got to come home with me.
The ones in 70, I think, are great, but they're a little more in-your-face rock and roll, whereas these ones, I mean, they perfected this jam. There's nothing better than when they land a Hard to Handle in 71.
Something different going on. This first night, 425, they flashed on the screen, said Bob Dylan. And I looked up and reasonably certain Dylan, who was in the box on the left side, got up and left at that point.
We got into this story on our Fillmore East Late Show episode, where Allan Arkush says it happened on the third night when the Beach Boys showed up. A night Dylan was confirmed to be watching from the balcony in a Rolling Stone report. It was still a busy week, though.
We got a former member of the Grateful Dead hanging out here in New York. Tom Constantin going to join us on this next tune.
That was the Wednesday, April 28th show, where Tom Constantin joined them. A few days earlier, on the 26th, Duane Allman appeared with the band for what would be the last time. In between those gigs, the Beach Boys played. Maybe my favorite guest appearance of the week is when the band gathered their friends and extended family to sing the ending of Ripple from a backstage microphone.
Then the closing night, my father was in the hospital dying. And I left the hospital on Thursday to go to the Fillmore. I got there a few minutes late, and the Riders were on stage playing. And I'm walking down the aisle now, and Garcia's right in front of me because he's playing the pedal steel right there. he sees me and gives me a nod like, glad you made it. He's seen me a couple other times that week. I was right in front of him. Like, hey, where you been?
I don't know you. You've been lately on my mind.
The band's popularity at the Fillmore East gave them a firm headquarters in the New York area, allowing them to continue to expand their territory and spread to other locales in the Northeast. It's not on the truckin' map, but Westchester was home to the Dead's next stronghold. We now return to the Capitol Theater in Portchester for the February 24th, 1971 show. The topic of these episodes is the Grateful Dead and the Deadheads on the road, and the Capitol became one of the first tour-like destinations for New York City Deadheads, even if it only required getting on the Metro North and walking across a parking lot. Gary Lambert.
The Grateful Dead had played New York City or its immediate suburbs something like 45 times in 1970 already. They were on such a roll, and that was part of Sam Cutler and John McIntyre's grand design to have the Grateful Dead come to the Northeast a lot, hit a lot of colleges, and that was so crucial to them building audience.
In March 1970, Howard Stein booked the Dead to be the first band at the Capitol Theater in Portchester, another venue we spent quite some time hanging out at. Here's what Sam Cutler told us in 2021.
I did the first ever show that the Grateful Dead did in the Capitol Theatre, and they loved it. We loved it. And there's a lot of theatres in America like that. What was happening in America was, you poor Americans are a bit slow sometimes. You didn't realise how good those rooms were. So people were turning them into warehouses. I don't know, you know what I mean? There was like the Fox Theatre in St. Louis. Fantastic, beautiful. It was a fucking cinema. But what a room. Perfect.
Archivist David Lemieux.
This is a place where the Dead had a very short history, although they did do 18 performances. They went there 3 separate visits in 70, March, June, and November, and then the big 6-night run in 71. And I've met so many Deadheads who are not from Manhattan. They weren't from Brooklyn. They were from Westchester County, and that was where they saw their first Dead shows.
Like the Fillmore East, the Dead made a deep bond with the local crew. Longtime roadie Big Steve Parrish and lighting director Candace Brightman connected with the Dead while working for promoter Howard Stein in 1970 and 1971.
Unfortunately, the March, June, and November 70 shows, we don't have soundboard tapes in the vault. I've heard the same audience tapes that we've all heard, and they're fun, they're good, but they're not to be released, I don't think.
The vibe at the Cap was suited to Deadheads mostly, give or take the fire marshal. Here's the late great taper Marty Weinberg interviewing an usher at the Capitol in November 1970.
Is there ever a concert where you never have to hassle people?
Yeah.
Where? Besides the Dead.
Oh no, the Dead is the worst one for hassling people.
Why?
Because of the fire laws, the way they are. And everybody smokes, it's a bummer.
Well, why do you have to keep people off the aisles?
Because that's another fire law.
Oh,
See, there are people in Portchester, particularly the fire commission, who wants to close down this theater.
Oh. Don't smoke that joint. Pass it around.
Like the Fillmore East, we've spent quite a bit of time at the Cap on the Deadcast. We've posted links to our Skull and Roses episodes at dead.net/Deadcast. And maybe you spent some time there too. Unlike the Fillmore East, the venue reopened in the 90s, and then again under the auspices of Peter Shapiro in 2012. After the November 1970 shows, the Dead had planned to return just a month later.
Yeah, hiya, folks. This is Jerry Garcia, and this is Mickey Hart of the Grateful Dead, here today to say to you that we're sorry. We're sorry, yes, we're sorry. We really are, sorry. But we're not the only ones that are sorry. I'm going to be sorry, too, as soon as we tell There are lots of sorry people in this world, and that we're not playing in Portchester. Jerry, tell them, Jerry. On those days. Tell them the dates, we're sorry for.
Real effective messaging, dudes. No notes. That was Jerry Garcia and Mickey Hart announcing the cancellation of the December 1970 gigs. They rescheduled for February 1971, 4 nights, with 2 more tacked on after those sold out. Blair Jackson, who went on to co-found the Golden Road, was there.
that's when I first got the notion to go to more than one show in a run. I thought, well, if they're playing 5 shows or whatever, it was 6 shows, I should go to at least 2. And I remember very vividly that I was playing intramural basketball. I was a pretty good basketball player, and we had made the playoffs, I guess it was late November, or early December or something. And when I heard that tickets were going on sale up at the Capitol, I missed a playoff game to go get in line and freeze my ass off buying Grateful Dead tickets to the shows.
David Lemieux.
But those 71 shows are interesting. They're unique. There's all that music they debuted at these shows on the first couple of nights.
The February 1971 shows at the Capitol are candidates for the most eventful gigs in the band's history, by some metrics, all of which we explored in more nuance in Season 3. The band brought the recording team of Bob Matthews and Betty Cantor and the Alembic 16 track, intending to record a live album of new songs, and they debuted a half-dozen new originals. Ned Lagin performed with the band for the entirety of the first night, and following that show, Mickey Hart departed for nearly 5 years. And during all of those gigs, Dr. Stanley Krippner was performing his dream telepathy experiment.
He was correct 4 out of 6 times, which is pretty astonishing. But remember that 3 out of 6 times would have been due to chance alone. So we got 1 night above chance. So that was not the statistic that really yielded us the most dynamic results.
There's lots more with Stanley Krippner in Season 3. But despite multi-tracking the 6 nights for their new album and making great tapes, the band decided they needed to keep recording.
We had these great quality tapes, and we figured let's get another one of them out.
Actually, 2 of them. The full show from February 24th and the second set from the 20th. Howie Levine went to the first and last night of the run, and he remembers part of this as being the first night. But based on the tapes and some other correspondence, I'm pretty sure it was the 24th, the show on the new box.
It was an interesting night from my perspective in high school, not 17 yet, but on a first date with a friend and his girlfriend. And we go up there and had some psychedelics, and then there's a bomb scare. And they emptied the theater because people wanted to get in.
The capper to the eventful week was a bomb scare, phoned in during the New Riders set.
As whoever it was phoned in that bomb report, thanks a whole hell of a lot. I know you're out there, and you got in free. And it ain't a good idea, because it makes a whole bunch of people.
And he brought all his friends with him.
Jerry Garcia told our pal Eric Nelson about it in 1983.
The Capitol Theater in Portchester. I remember that one real well. Yeah, that was a ticket scam. That was funny.
Yeah, really.
It was so obvious, too.
Was it?
Yeah, it was real obvious. We all went to this bar right next door with most of the audience, Mm-hmm. And, I mean, it was just, it was obvious what was happening. It was like a good, like an hour and a half, maybe, of a sort of a break in the evening. And then it was, back in with a whole lot of extra people.
It was the first night. I could picture us sitting with our 2 girlfriends, sitting in like a little booth on the corner luncheonette while we're waiting to go back in.
It's memories like this that provide the proof that slightly differing timelines are perfectly visible from our own, and gives me hope that maybe we can figure out how to shift into alternative chronologies. Perhaps dead tapes were the answer all along.
I'm going down the road, feeling bad. Going down the road, feeling bad. Going down the road, feeling bad. Hey, yeah. Treated this old.
The Dead play this amazing set, and this is to 1871, which was all the new songs, which were amazingly great. Pigpen was off the charts, terrific. And we're flying high.
Without a warning, you broke my heart. Taking it, baby, torn it apart. You left for me standing.
We were center downstairs, probably about 10, 12 rows out. And Pig was just hot. I mean, he was just great. The love light that night was just over the top, where he picked out a couple of people in the audience and was going on them.
Ooh, wait a minute. I want to ask somebody a question. Do you have a young lady with you? Okay, she's with you. You fine, man. You set. What about you? Do you have a young lady with you?
I just remember the love light just ripping the place up and the place shaking. Everybody on their feet, moving around, jumping. Everybody was in the same place. I remember Portchester. The whole place was with them. The whole place was right there. And that last night, everybody was right there with them.
The bomb threat on the last night is part of what led to the venue's subsequent closure that spring. Rolling Stone reported it under the headline, "Rock Thumped in Westchester County." We've posted a link at dead.net/deadcast.
We're taking the train back to the city. And we get back to the city, and it's probably 2:30 in the morning. And we said, we're hungry. Let's see if we can find something. We go outside Grand Central. Hard Automat was across the street on 42nd Street. And we go into the Automat. What I saw in the Automat, which was not to reoccur in my lifetime for probably 7 or 8 years, which was I walked into the Star Wars Cantina. I'm looking around, and there's people with two heads, and there's hoses coming out of. It was like, where am I? It was one of the most surreal things I've ever been to in my life. My friends are looking around, and we're totally freaked by this whole thing. The girl I was with, this my first and last date, because she didn't get home until 8 o'clock in the morning. It was a school night, and her mother had called the police on me. It was a fun ending to the night. Years later now, I'm out at school in Oregon, and I was doing some research paper, and I was looking at the use of psychedelics to treat alcoholism. That was the research. And I'm in the library, and I have this obscure journal, and I'm reading the article, and I turn the last page. What's the next page? It's an article published about the ESP experiments.
Howie would have been perusing a 1973 edition of the Journal of the American Society of Psychosomatic Dentistry and Medicine. We've posted links to the results of Dr. Krippner's dream telepathy experiment at dead.net/deadcast. In early 1971, the same season as the shows we've just been focusing on, the band found a place they loved a few hours up the road from the Capitol Theater, in Boston.
The Boston Music Hall, a venue the Dead had a pretty important history, 71 to 78.
Today, we're setting our sights on the September 1972 gigs the band played there, featured on the new Enjoying the Ride.
I just jumped the watchman right outside the fence. Took his rings for bucks and change. Ain't that heaven sent? Hurts my ears to listen, and burns my eyes to see. Cut down a man in cold blood, Shannon. Might as well be me.
The Dead didn't play in Boston nearly as much as they played in New York, but that only meant they came through 2 or 3 times a year instead of 4 or 5, and they built a pretty heady Boston following. Ned Lagin first saw the band at the Psychedelic Ballroom, the Boston Tea Party, as he told us on the Nedcast, which we've linked back to at dead.net/deadcast.
I was going to MIT. I was going to music school, Berklee School of Music, and friends of mine in the dorm that I lived in were telling me, as a jazz improviser, that I ought to listen in particular to the Grateful Dead. And so they loaned me Anthem of the Sun and Aoxomoxoa and the Grateful Dead, their first album. And I was pretty inspired by all of it. And they talked me into going to a concert, a gig. And I forget whether the club was the Ark or the Boston Tea Party at the time.
Boston Tea Party, Ned.
This was a club near Fenway Park. Go Red Sox. That club probably held 200 or 300 people, to give you an idea of the size. And the Grateful Dead were an hour late in starting. When they came out, they sat on their amplifiers for a while trying to get collected, and then played in a marvelous set.
After writing the Dead a letter, Ned met the band on their spring 1970 trip to MIT and became a regular jamming partner during their trips through the region as they graduated from college gyms to the music hall. Opened in 1925, the Boston Music Hall was no discarded cinema like the Cap and the Fillmore East, but a proper 4,200 capacity theater with a 3,100 pipe Wurlitzer organ. They played there twice in 71, and by the end of 1972 were probably too big for the place already.
It really exemplifies a smaller place the Dead were playing when they very easily could have played a bigger place. A year later, 6 months later, they're playing Boston Garden. 72, they started their fall tour there, the 15th and 16th, originally supposed to be at SPAC, and the Saratoga Town Council said, whoa, we don't want all these Deadheads.
By the end of 1972, the band's relentless Northeast gigging was beginning to pay dividends, and they were able to reschedule their tour opening shows on 2 weeks' notice. In 1972 as well, Ron Rakow was cooling his heels, waiting for the Dead to make the decision about whether or not to start their own record company.
In September of that year, we played at the Boston Music Hall, and I was an equipment guy on that tour. We stayed at the Sheraton Hotel in Boston, and I stayed in room 1234.
Welcome back, Rack. I'm pretty tickled that we have a reason to get into this very ridiculous Ron Rakow adventure. Before the Boston Music Hall, the Dead had played 2 nights at the Hollywood Palladium, some of which is now on Dave's Picks 46.
Went down to the mountain, I was drinking some wine. Looked up in the heaven, and I saw somebody sign written by across the heaven. Painted black and white, get prepared. It's gonna be a party tonight. Hey, Saturday night. Yeah. One more Saturday night.
The guys left 8 days before. That's 4 trucks with 8 guys. And they're driving all our equipment caravan to Boston. We get to Boston, and the trucks are not there yet. So, and we were concerned about it. So Jerry came to my room at the Sheraton, room 1234, and he said, the trucks aren't there. I said, I know. I said, I'm going to call Teddy Kennedy and see if I can get a Sikorsky Sky Crane to meet the trucks and fly them, helicopter them from the road to behind the theater. I don't know shit. You know what I mean? I don't know if that's even possible, but that sounds far out. So Jerry said, who's going to pay for that? I said, let's not worry about that now. Let the government pay for it. And so he laughed, and I called Kennedy's office, and they called me right back. Like 10 minutes later, he said it's not his thing that he could do.
Because Ron Rakow was nothing if not persistent, he ended up on the line with Massachusetts Governor Francis Sargent.
So I called, and I got the governor of the state of Massachusetts. And he said, let's see if we can find out where the trucks are. I'll call you right back. So he called the state police, and the state police called him back in about 5 minutes and said, 4 trucks just entered the state of Massachusetts.
and they're on their way to Boston. So he said, we don't need Sikorsky sky cranes. You just will get a cordon of police cars to go pedal to the metal all the way down the freeway right to the theater. So I said, oh, that would be great. Okay, so they send off a phalanx of police cars to meet the 4 trucks. And sure as shit, the guys are sitting in the trucks and all these police cars come, red lights on, sirens blaring, and they all started throwing their shit out the window. In about an hour and a half, they're in Boston behind the theater. Sonny Hurd, he comes roaring out of the truck. Where is that Jew? I'm going to break his fucking neck. So he said, I don't have any dope, man. We all threw our dope out the window. I laughed.
Ron Rakow had a new assignment. Arrange for a fresh tour stash. We'll return to that story.
I left my home in Norfolk, Virginia, California on my mind. Straddled that Greyhound and rode it past Raleigh on across Carolina.
David Lemieux.
The first night, 9:15, probably would have come out a long time ago as part of the Dave's Pick series if we had the 5th reel. And so this is one of the few shows in the box set that isn't quite complete. The very end is missing. A couple of songs are missing at the end. But what is there, including that huge other one amongst Bird Song, so much good music in here. It is a top-notch fall 72 show.
Had just finished mixing Europe 72, though hadn't yet released it. But both Jerry Garcia and Bob Weir had put out their solo debut albums earlier that year. All 5 discs of material were well repped in Boston.
Black-throated wind keeps on pouring in with its words of a life when nothing is new. Our Mother American
because there was a little bit missing, what we've done is we've taken the big Dark Star jam from the next night at the Boston Music Hall, and we've included that. So you've got, it's the kind of rare release that has both a huge 72 other one and a huge 72 Dark Star.
This is a show where Ned Lagin says he played Wurlitzer during Dark Star only, but he would have been only going through a stage amp and not heard on the soundboard, and not necessarily heard even too far beyond the stage. It's hard to tell. It's a wonderful 1972 Dark Star, whether you can hear Ned contributing or not. Some great episodic turns near the end where you might be able to hear that whirly. was on the second night that Ron Rakow solved the problem of the tour stash. The persona of Cousin David came up during our Wake of the Flood season, when the Dead needed money to start their own record company. Rack is talking about cash here, but every word also applies to Boston.
I got it from Cousin David. He's your Cousin David also. Cousin David was the head of a 7-airplane, small airplane smuggling operation with about 12 people, really tight, that smuggled Mexican weed into the United States.
Problem solved. After the second show in Boston, they met up back in room 1234 at the Sheraton.
The next day, he brings in a ball jar, but it's a 5-gallon ball jar. I never even heard of that before. I sat down next to the thing, and it was my eyes. The top of the thing was at my eyes, from my ass to my eyes. That's a big jar. And I put my arm around it like it was a person. The shoulder of the jar was like the shoulder of a person.
New problem created. The band was already gone. They had a show the next night in Baltimore.
Those guys were not even coming back to the hotel after the gig. We loaded up their shit before the gig on the buses. I had to stay over because I had to accept the jar and figure out how to get it to New York. So I was alone.
With Sunday morning coming down hard, Rakow was sitting in room 1234 with a massive amount of weed, meant to supply the Dead's East Coast tour for the next 6 weeks. Maybe.
So now I'm in Boston with a thing that I can't, no way can I take that on an airplane in any manner or form. There was just no way I'd be comfortable with a 5-gallon jar full of unpressed buds, beautiful tops from Mexico. So that's when I looked out the window and saw Emily coming from the streetcar into the hotel.
They'd met the day before. Quick flashback.
The next morning, Saturday morning, I go down to eat breakfast with Jerry at 9:15 in the morning. And this waitress is not our waitress, but she buzzes by the table, and her back is to me. She's talking to Jerry. And she said, "Hi, Jerry, my name is Emily." And she has this button on her chest that says Emily. And I was at the show last night. It was terrific. I'm going to go tonight.
We're going to skip a few steps here and tell you that Emily safely got Rakow and the giant bell jar of Mexican weed to New York, where all three met up with the Dead in time for their gig at Roosevelt Stadium. There's a slight twist ending to this Grateful Dead tour story, though.
She didn't go home for 11 months. That was pretty far out. Anyway, so I wound up marrying her.
That is indeed pretty far out. To hear the tale of Ron and Emily's wedding, check out our Unbroken Chain episode. We've posted a link, of course, at dead.net/deadcast. We now return to our box set discussion in progress. The show at Roosevelt Stadium that Rack delivered the weed to was the band's second show there in 3 months, alongside a run at the Stanley Theater in Jersey City, a quick PATH train ride from Manhattan. Throughout the 70s especially, the Dead tried to have it all.
They would sometimes hit Boston for 2 nights or 3 at the Boston Music Hall, or 1 night at Boston Garden. In fall of 73, they're playing Music Hall. Summer of 74, they're playing Boston Garden. So they're, able to do both, and I think that's just fascinating.
But after 1972, at least in the New York area, that became pretty impossible for a few years. As we've been saying, New York was Grateful Dead country.
I can't tell you how many of my good Deadhead friends are Long Island Deadheads. Merrick, Baldwin, Long Beach, all these people came from Long Island. I still today meet Deadheads all the time who are from Long Island.
Sup, David?
I used to go on tour with Mike Finkelstein, another Merrick Baldwin kind of guy. And these guys used to talk about this huge steal your face on the way into the city. This is in the 70s. And maybe one of your listeners will know, but there was somewhere on Long Island that somebody had painted a giant steal your face. It was either on a highway overpass. This is in the 70s. Maybe it was a cliff face as you drive into the city or take the train into the city. But Long Island Deadheads, it was like their artwork signaling, like you say, we're in Grateful Dead country now. Whether they're older Deadheads, my age or older, or young people. And it's like, Long Island really loved the Grateful Dead. So a 17,000 seat venue to play there anytime they wanted was pretty cool.
The show on Enjoying the Ride is from the band's second ever gig at Nassau Coliseum, May 16th, 1973.
So this show in particular, it's the second tour of 1973 for the Dead. They did that February tour, and then a week after the February tour, Pigpen passed away, and then a week after that, the Dead hit the road with 3 nights at Nassau.
Kenny Schiff left us this story at stories.dead.net.
In March of 73, I was 14 and lived in Queens, not too far from the Nassau Coliseum. I was already a serious Deadhead going back to 1970 when we got the first copies of Working Man's Dead. How our parents let myself and my buddy Jeff Mayer go with his older sister to the dance concert, general admission, is beyond me. When they let us in, we ran down the very, very steep arena stairs to get down to the floor and nearly got trampled in the stampede. It was incredible. I am super glad that my mother was not a helicopter mom at that point, and I am able to talk about this 50 years later with great appreciation.
Howie Levine came down for the shows.
I came down from school in Buffalo to go to the 15th and 16th. The 15th is the first show after Pigpen died. Although Pig wasn't on tour a lot the last year and a half, it was in your mind he was not going to be there, which was, a little sad. But the band was great the first night, I remember.
We've released a lot of music from this tour. We've released the 24th at the Spectrum. The 26th is coming out very soon from Baltimore. The 28th in Springfield. The 31st is the bonus disc this year for Dave's Pick subscribers. The April 2nd at the Garden, back to Boston Garden. So if you're following the Dead's releases, you'll know those shows and you'll know the quality of this time. And I find this Nassau show is right up there. The first set, China Rider, come on.
San Francisco, the Grateful Dead.
It's actually the very first China Cat Sunflower I Know You rider to feature a fully developed version of what tapers call the Feelin' Groovy Jam, and sometimes erroneously label the Uncle John's Band Jam. You can hear Phil Lesh instigate it. The Feelin' Groovy Jam had lived previously mostly in versions of Darkstar, like this classic February 13th, 1970 take on Dick's Picks 4. Starting with this Nassau Coliseum version, the Feelin' Groovy Jam lived in every version of the China Rider transition up through the band's road hiatus the next year.
It's a really, really top-notch Dead show, and then you get a big Darkstar.
super dreamy. Dig this passage with Garcia on slide guitar. Bill Graham had advertised the shows with the tag, a swell dance concert. And inside Nassau Coliseum, it was a pretty enormous party.
We, believe it or not, brought a small tank of nitrous in with us. We brought this tank in underneath a poncho. It was bigger than like a scuba diving tank. We wound up that night, the tank was like at the last row at the top of the Coliseum. If you listen closely, you heard the psh every so often.
We told this story in our Watkins Glen episode, but it might pertain to this show. Our pal Michael Simmons worked the door for the comedy troupe, the Lemieux, who attended one of the Nassau shows collectively. Michael remembers it as the first night, but also remembers the New Riders opening, which would put us at this gig. Either way, imagine a full cast of freaks, including Chevy Chase and John Belushi, rolling up to the Coliseum.
One of the cast members, his girlfriend at the time, was a high-end drug dealer. And so the entire cast went to see the Dead. And she gave everybody a hit of mescaline. And John did 4. John being, always taking it over the top. So in the middle of the show, I decided I was going to take a walk. It's a huge cavernous place where you can hear the music virtually anywhere you are.
There was a wide outer concourse at Nassau Coliseum, where you could circle the venue again and again and again and again and again and again and again, as teenage head Michael Simmons did.
And so I wandered around and I'm tripping. It's circular. So I look up and I see John surrounded by 6 cops. I know John's tripping on 4 hits of mescaline, and I'm only tripping on 1 hit of mescaline, and I'm really high. So I can only imagine how high John is. I'm staring at this spectacle of John talking to a bunch of cops, uniformed cops, and suddenly the cops all break out laughing. I can't hear what anybody's saying, but I can see that the cops are all laughing hysterically. Obviously, John was entertaining them, doing some kind of bit or something, and absolutely had him in his pocket. And John looked down from a higher perch that he was on, looked down at me, and gave me the infamous eyebrow that anyone who's seen Animal House would know what I'm talking about, the infamous eyebrow. As in, you and I know how high I am, and you and I know that they have no idea how high I am. It was fantastic. It was a work of art.
But hold on that image again, and you'll realize that the venue was hopping with Long Island cops. Belated thanks to John Belushi for keeping some of them distracted, because many, many people got busted over the course of the 3 nights.
The music was great. The Coliseum sucked. Always did. Still does. Still does. It's still there. It's terrible.
When the Dead returned in September, they made the venue promise not to hassle their fans as much, which the cops did anyway, and the Dead didn't return for another 6 years. Despite the checkered relationship, there was no denying its central-ish location for Long Island Dead freaks, and the band played there pretty consistently through the 80s and 90s, including the March 1990 show that began their fertile musical relationship with Branford Marsalis. While the Dead loved their New York fan base, their investment in the city could be a little overwhelming sometimes, just even trying to find places to play. Famously, they played 8 nights at Radio City Music Hall in October 1980 that were mined for 2 live albums and a concert film, which you can hear about in detail in our Dead Behind, Dead Ahead episode, linked at dead.net/deadcast.
Fly the seabirds, scattered like lost words. We'll do the storm and fly.
But there was really only one venue they were circling. The fourth and current iteration of Madison Square Garden opened in February 1968, and it was suggested as early as 1971 that the Dead could play there, but preferred to play in smaller places. But by the end of the 1970s, they were running out of options. Archivist David Lemieux.
They started playing the Garden in 79, which is amazing. It took them 14 years to play here. It was supposed to be 13, but then Jerry got sick in fall of 78. But January 79, they start playing the Garden. They were playing Nassau in 73, same venue, same size venue. They were playing Roosevelt Stadium. So they were playing the New York City area and playing very big places. They just never played the Garden. So they finally played there in 79, played there quite a bit till 83, and then they took a 4-year hiatus.
We visited the Garden pretty extensively during our episodes about the In and Out of the Garden box when we spoke with John Scher, who promoted nearly all of the Dead's Garden appearances, starting with their January 1979 debut.
We had a lot of dialogue. That's the one thing. We had a lot of dialogue on every move that we made. And I basically said to him, guys, we can't play theaters anymore. When we first played Madison Square Garden, it was like me saying to them, guys, there's nowhere else to go. So as usual, technically, they got into gear and thought left and right how they can make it sound better, how the lighting could be. They had for most of their career a brilliant lighting designer named Candace Brightman, who is as good as anybody ever in the world. So she, the lighting, nothing special, no lasers, but she was an artist and a magician.
We've linked to the episodes dead.net/deadcast.
They stayed completely on top of sound and lights, and I didn't have anything to do with it other than I made sure those people got paid. Like I said, Candace and then Dan Healy, a couple of other people, were intricately involved, always trying to make it better, better, better. But they cared that much about the audience, and they weren't going to play arenas until they thought they could get it right.
They tried the Beacon, they tried the Palladium, they tried a bunch of places. They didn't have a place to play until I think they finally accepted that, we can sell out 3 nights at the Garden, and this is what Deadheads want.
The Dead returned to the Garden for 2 nights, just 5 months after playing Radio City, now on In and Out of the Garden.
Just like New York City, just like Jericho.
The Dead built up a pretty wild reputation for their Garden shows. By the time of the 1981, 82, and 83 shows on the In and Out of the Garden box, they clearly got plenty comfortable playing there, filling up the arena for multiple nights without a hit record, or without a new album at all. Mid-decade, they shifted to playing the newly opened Meadowlands in New Jersey. But then something extremely unexpected happened. They had a hit record.
We will get by. We will get by. We will get by. We will survive.
That was the Dead on the second night of their 5-night run in 1987, September 16th, when they returned to the Garden as In the Dark and Touch of Grey stormed the top 10 album and single charts respectively, and the show included on the new box set. David Lemieux.
I only saw the Dead at the Garden once, 2 nights, in 1987. I was 16.
Thank you for calling the Grateful Dead hotline number. This is a new message as of October 10th.
Howdy, folks. This is Garcia. I'd like to thank you for all the cards and letters and well wishes and stuff while I was down. Here's Eileen with pertinent information.
Because I used to call the the East Coast hotline number like daily. Sorry, Mom, for your phone bill. I called them up and they had 5 nights at Madison Square Garden. I was like, wow. It was my lady friend's, she was 15 and she was turning 16 the night of one of the shows. I said, oh, we got to go see the Dead. I remember mailing off for Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I wrote, as we used to do on our little 3x5 index cards, or any night available. And a couple weeks later, I get back in the mail tickets for Tuesday, Wednesday shows. I was like, oh, this isn't going to go over well with my parents because I was 16 years old in high school. But they were cool. They let me go. So we bought some, $89 airplane tickets from Ottawa to New York City, and stayed down to Midtown. We actually stayed right near Lincoln Center, and we went in '87. And I remember just being in awe of being in New York City and eating so much food and so much of the best food and so much of the most inexpensive food I'd ever had.
Also in town was our third eye in the sky from the Deadcast traffic copter, Tyler Roy-Hart, a.k.a. Mr. Completely.
That was my first time in New York ever. Because to me, getting to New York, I was dependent on people to stay with. And I was trading tapes with one of my friends that I stayed with. It was within like a 10-minute subway ride of the venue. There was no shakedown. It was chaos outside the venue, but there was no central location for it.
David Lemieux.
I'd only seen the Dead at that point 4 times. And when the Dead played these places, the whole city almost shut down. I remember in New York City, I didn't feel that way. I felt that, around the Garden, sure, that the 18,000 of us, it was very visible that the Dead were in town. The circus was in town. But you go uptown or downtown and all of a sudden, not even a blip on the radar. There was a very good reason why a place like the Greek or the Kaiser or the Frost would maybe not welcome the Dead back because it was overwhelming. New York is built for 20,000 Deadheads showing up.
A goodly number of those Deadheads came from Long Island. Please welcome Henry Kay.
Of course, being from Long Island, New York, Arden was our home turf. And I had been to every venue between Virginia and New York, but there was never anything like a Madison Square Garden concert. And the great thing about the Garden is you didn't have to drive. So we'd hop on the train in Woodmere, 3:30, 4 o'clock, and it would be the last of the commuters of rush hour. So there'd be business suits on there, and the tie-dyes would slowly start getting on, and then Hewlett, and then Lynbrook, and then Valley Stream, more and more Deadheads. And by the time you got into Jamaica to switch to Penn Station, it was flooded with tie-dyes, and you just knew everybody came from their little privileged Long Island towns where we were all cast outs and misfits in this kind of 1980s conspicuous consumption age of Gordon Geckos, and everybody is into capitalism. And so we realized, oh my God, we are not alone.
Mr. Completely.
It was like everyone was really separate until all of a sudden we were there right going into the venue. Like it wasn't really a crowd, wasn't really a big hangout scene of like other Deadheads until you were right at the venue. And then it was bedlam and awesome.
That's what everybody was there for. That's the moment everybody was just like tuned into, coming from their jobs, coming off the trains, coming out of the city, just into the Garden, then boom. It really was. It was like electricity. I just remember that moment when the light shut and there's that pause before the band kind of tunes up. And it's just incredible.
So I went to the first 2 shows of that run, September 15th and 16th, and I love them. The first night was okay. The second night I thought was, I think, one of the best shows in 1987, the show in our box set, September 16th.
One contrast between the Fillmore East in 1971 and the Garden in 87 is how the Dead continued to act as a musical crossroads, both on stage and off. The closing of the Fillmore East had seen guest appearances by T.C., the Beach Boys and Duane Allman, and a near miss with Bob Dylan. But there were different levels of intersectionality occurring at the Garden in 87.
I remember walking in, show started at 7:30, I guess. I walk in at 6:30, get my seat, and I notice there's this crazy stage setup. And Mickey comes out at 7:30, goes, hey, before we get started, my good friend Baba Tunde Olatunji and his Drums of Passion are going to play a set. So they came out and played a 35-minute set. Unannounced.
Very good friends of mine. First, Baba Olatunji from Nigeria.
The Dead never had opening bands at a show like this, ever. They play this incredible 35-minute opening set at the normal time. And so the Dead didn't come on until about 8:30. So it was a bit of a later show.
We actually have Gary Lambert to thank for this.
This was a byproduct of my promoting jazz and reggae and world music and all kinds of non-rock shows for Bill Graham Presents, specifically at our club called Wolfgangs. And we had Baba Olatunji coming in. And I think it was the first time he played the Bay Area in quite a few years. And during the course of this promotion, I had a weekend off and I went to see I flew east, saw my folks, went to see the Grateful Dead at the Nassau Coliseum. And I brought along a flyer for the Olatunji show. I had some backstage passes, so I was walking around backstage. And just before the second set started, I see Mickey with his drumsticks walking back toward the stage. I say, hey, Mickey, if you're back home in the Bay Area in mid-May, you might want to check this out. And I show him the flyer, and he drops his drumsticks on the floor, and he says, that's my hero. He said, yeah, I saw Baba Olatunji at the New York World's Fair in 1964, and it changed my life, as had I. And he said, yeah, I don't only want to come to that show, I want to mix the sound. So they had never met, apparently. And so it was at that show that Baba and Mickey got introduced.
Baba Olatunji opened for the Dead on New Year's 1985 and remained part of the Grateful Dead's universe, surely playing to his biggest New York crowd in years on September 16, 1987, just before the show on the new box.
One of my favorite first sets of all time. Maybe it was because I was there, but for whatever reason, I've listened to this 916 show a lot. And it is an amazing show. The fact that they open the show with Touch of Grey.
Among other musical heavies attending shows at the Garden was the band's record company boss, Clive Davis, who'd courted the Dead starting in 1970, signed them in 1976, and finally got a hit from them in 1987.
Famously, the night before, Clive Davis came to the show, and after the show, the band goes backstage, back to the dressing rooms, and Clive is there. And Jerry said, hey, Clive, what'd you think? What'd you think? He's, dude, how could you do this? You didn't play the hit single. It's your return to New York City. You didn't play that. And Jerry, we forgot. Hey, we forgot to play it. And so the next night, I think a bit of a gift to him. But Dennis McNally tells the story that Clive was like, he wasn't pissed, but he was shocked. It was like any band is going to open or encore with the big hit single that's made them famous. And the Dead didn't even play it. And they follow it up out of nowhere for no reason with Scarlet Begonias, with a massive jam coming out of Scarlet Begonias. But rather than go into Fire, they end it with the closing riff on Scarlet Begonias. First time they'd done that since 1977, early before Fire joined. A late standalone Scarlet Begonias blew me away.
A few seasons back, we unpacked Scarlet Begonias, and how, in part, it was Jerry Garcia's attempt to channel an island groove. Right in that same window, it turned out, Round Records briefly entertained the idea of actually signing Bob Marley. We've posted a link at dead.net/Deadcast. The person we have to thank for turning us onto that connection is Henry Kay, who we've been speaking with, and who also hosts the podcast Reggae's Untold Stories.
I had just come back from Jamaica where I had worked an internship for Mrs. Marley, Bob Marley's widow, at Tough Gong Records that summer. So I was literally just back in the States after about 3 or 4 months in Kingston. It was my summer break, was this great internship, which I had hooked up from working at a reggae company in D.C. They got me this incredible dream job in Kingston.
This was another way that Dead and Jerry Garcia band shows acted as a musical crossroads.
Growing up, obviously a reggae fan and a Deadhead, I always loved these type of musics. I mean, the connection between reggae and the Dead has always been the place where spirituality and musicality meet. Both are very strong, solid musicianship meets a spiritual element in lyrics and performance.
Stop that train, I'm leaving. Stop that train, I'm leaving. Stop that train, I'm leaving. And it won't be too long, whether I'm right or wrong.
That was the Jerry Garcia band doing Peter Tosh's Stop That Train at the Greek in Berkeley in August 1987, around the time Henry returned to the States. And a week and change later, there was big news in the reggae world, unfolding just after Henry came back from Kingston. The murder of Peter Tosh on September 11th, 1987.
It was very shocking, and New York Times had a front page article. I remember the very next day the story was out in the Times. The official narrative has always been the robbery gone wrong. They came up, they looked for money, there was no money there, they were angry, gunshots are fired, and Peter ends up getting 2 in the head.
But the story is far more complicated, and we encourage you to check out the new season of Henry Kay's podcast, Reggae's Untold Stories, which aims to unravel the still lingering mysteries behind Peter Tosh's death. We've posted a link to that, as well as a petition to reopen the case at dead.net/deadcast.
It happened literally the week the Dead started the 87 run at the Garden. For me and my friends, it was like, wow, because we all had been to the city 5 years earlier, seeing Peter Tosh just 5 blocks away at the pier. It was in the air, and I was kind of hoping the Dead would address it or mention it. They played Knocking on Heaven's Door every run, but I like to think that Knocking on Heaven's Door was maybe a shout out to Peter.
That's from later in the run. They also played it in Landover on September 12th, the day after the news broke. And of course, Stop That Train was back in the Garcia Band's repertoire as soon as they started playing again in October. But now back to the musical crossroads of Madison Square Garden.
We got an Esau in there and a High Time and a Let It Grow. It is a magnificent first set.
We'll be back in just a little bit.
One of the other features of the New York shows was simply that they were in New York, which allowed them to become a different kind of crossroads. This story takes place a few nights later, on September 20th, but it's too good not to include as set-break entertainment while we're visiting these shows. Once again, Gary Lambert.
Phil and I had just recently started doing our radio show, then Rex Radio and later Eyes of Chaos, Veil of Order. So we were kind of doing outreach to the gone world of music. We were getting in touch with people and soliciting their music and saying we'd love to play it on the air. And
for more on Gary and Phil's adventures in radio, check out the second part of our recent Philcast, which we've linked to at dead.net/deadcast. One target of their outreach was jazz titan Ornette Coleman.
I had developed a relationship with Ornette and his son, drummer, manager DiNardo, because I had been involved in promoting a couple of their shows in the Bay Area in 1984 and 86. And we really hit it off, and we developed a close friendship. Ornette and I shared a birthday of March 9th, and so he called me his twin. And we when Phil and I were talking about what we wanted to do with this radio show and talking about outreach to that world, I said, hey, Ornette lives 2 blocks from Madison Square Garden. Wouldn't it be fun if we invited him to a show? And this was the fall run of 1987 coming up, and Phil said, oh, yes, let's do just that.
There were countless unusual sights at Grateful Dead shows over their 30-year history, all singular, and Gary Lambert was witness to more than his share. But what he saw on September 20th, 1987, ranks up there.
Dan Healy had actually set up chairs specifically for this group of guests. I was their greeter and, got them to their seats and got them their passes and all of that stuff. And then through all kinds of cosmic synchronicities on the very same night, invited by someone completely separate, Cecil Taylor shows up at the same show. And I wind up being kind of their informal chaperone at the soundboard. When I saw Cecil, that was just sort of the topper, that, oh my God, we have 2 of the absolute founders of free jazz here to see the Grateful Dead at Madison Square Garden.
The someone who'd invited Cecil Taylor was none other than Calico, who we spoke about a bunch last episode, a member of the Hog Farm who operated the skeleton crew in Dead parking lots, and, in a previous life, had been Elizabeth Vandermeer, a very serious musicer on the 1960s New York jazz scene.
Calico had this amazing history in the New York jazz world. She was a jazz journalist. She was a jazz broadcaster. She was friends with Ornette and Cecil and all these people. And I think that Calico made the invitation, and it just happened to have happened on that same night.
A rare sight indeed. And also at the gig that night, presumably crossing paths with Cecil and Ornette somewhere in the bowels of the garden, was none other than Allen Ginsberg, who photographed Jerry Garcia backstage and made another significant connection. At the time, Allan was caretaker for the alchemist and filmmaker Harry Smith, who'd curated the Anthology of American Folk Music and was fairly broke at the moment.
Oh, the cuckoo is a pretty bird. She wobbles as she flies. She never hollers cuckoo till the 4th day July.
Some versions of this story place it at the Warfield in San Francisco, others at the Garden. Ginsberg was a regular at shows. Along with Allan, for at least some of the gigs, was Raymond Foy.
Allan used to go to Dead shows fairly regularly. We went together. And backstage, Jerry was not into hanging out, and he was kind of rushing away from Allan. I don't remember if he was going on stage or getting off stage or something. And Allan said, we need to help Harry Smith. And Jerry said, is he still alive? Allan said, yes, and he needs help. And Jerry said, I learned to play the banjo from Harry Smith's anthology. We used to slow those records down to 16 RPM to learn the solos. He said, sure, we'll give him $5,000 a month. And Allan said, 10,000. And Jerry said, 10,000, whatever. And he just walked away, just rushed away.
The Rex Foundation supported Smith during the last years of his life, teaching at the Naropa Institute in Colorado and living at the Chelsea Hotel in New York. We've posted a link to Allen Ginsberg's photograph of Jerry at dead.net/deadcast. Talk about a crossroads. The Dead, Allen Ginsberg, Ornette Coleman, and Cecil Taylor under the same big tent.
I didn't find out till much later there was some weird tension between Ornette and Cecil at that point. There had been a disagreement between them over a collaborative project gone wrong. So there was sort of a real, sort of distant, awkward formality between them, but not hostility. It was just they didn't interact a whole lot with each other, and I didn't even give it a thought. They settled into their seats, and out came the Grateful Dead and played a show, played a first set. And of course, I was spending half my time not looking at the band, but looking at those guys looking at the band. Cecil and Ornette were very different people temperamentally. Cecil was kind of bopping to the music, and he had his hair in these tight little dreadlocks, which were kind of bouncing up and down when he moved. And Ornette just had this beautiful, inscrutable smile on his face the whole time. And it looked like he was taking in everything. He was looking around at the crowd and just absorbing the whole atmosphere of things. And then set break came, and I got to escort them backstage and actually make the introductions. I mean, getting to say, Jerry Garcia, Ornette Coleman, Jerry Garcia. It was just like Oscar Wilde, Socrates. I mean, they just immediately took to each other.
By the next year, Garcia was appearing with Ornette Coleman in primetime for 3 songs on their Virgin Beauty album. Ornette Coleman himself would play with the Dead twice in 1993 as well. Stories we don't have time to get into today.
Ornette said during the course of one of the jams, when you've been playing together this long, you don't even have to listen to each other.
This might sound like a backhanded compliment at first, but from Ornette Coleman, it was actually deep jazz wisdom.
Ornette thought there was a place beyond listening. Like he thought listening and reacting could stand in the way of music moving forward, everyone being too deferential to one another. You know, and I once heard him talking to the musician in his band. He said, well, don't be too worried about listening, because if you listen to something and then respond to it, you're reacting to a moment that already happened. And what you should be thinking about is moving together toward the next moment.
Billy Kreutzmann's memoir, Deal, includes a story about one of the 1993 gigs with Ornette, in which Kreutzmann is informed that Coleman told someone he felt like the band wasn't listening to one another. Sometime after that, Gary was able to correct the record.
And then I told him the story of Ornette saying, when you've been playing together this long, you don't have to listen to each other because you get there through intuition and empathy. And Billy was thrilled. He said, oh man, that makes so much more sense. I feel so much better.
Our jazz interlude concluded. Let's get back to the Garden. The vibe in Madison Square Garden in the 80s and 90s was unmatched, in part because of one of the venue's signature architectural elements, an inner concourse that allowed audience members to circle the entire space without exiting the performing area. It sometimes resembled a New York City street, transported into the middle of the venue. Tragically, it was removed during the building's 21st century renovations. Mr. Completely.
Everyone who still goes to shows now and went to shows then really misses the inner concourse. I can't remember a single venue that had that. And I also don't remember a single venue that was that big where that much of the room sounded good to great. I don't know what it was. It was a better sounding room than Hampton over most of it. Like Hampton's longer, and so it gets those dead pockets in the back. Like you can find pockets in Hampton Coliseum that kind of suck sound-wise. And I was all over MSG with kind of bad seats for half those shows, and I'd never had something that I thought sounded terrible.
Really had to move. That's why, if you please, I am on my bended knee. Further don't you come around here anymore.
The venue also had another special feature. New York Dead shows were always built on New York Dead freak energy, but inside Madison Square Garden, it occurred at a vaster scale.
There's a different outlaw energy on the East Coast, where it's, I don't want to call it performative, but because it's not performative, but there's an element of pushing it to see how much you can get away with. Like people relatively openly smoking weed, sure. People maybe getting away with doing a little other this and that, sure. But actually bringing in a tube, that was not, like the only other places I had saw that were a couple of West Coast places. By fall 87, venues were more conscious of deadheads for the most part, but people were still bringing in 3 and 4 foot graphics, and there were nitrous tanks in the building. Do you really need the 4 foot graphics? No. But you're going to do it anyway just because you fucking can. Just a little more kind of, you can't stop me sort of energy to it. That was fun. I enjoyed that. A little more kind of actively anti-authoritarian. As opposed to on the West Coast, it felt almost more like attempts that authority had been so thoroughly dissolved, there was no act of rebellion necessary.
Honestly, I'm pretty sure Madison Square Garden in the 90s was the first place I ever personally laid eyes on a bong. Another pair of Madison Square Garden's emergent features, sadly, are full facial recognition technology and a penchant for banning people from their properties, which also include the Vegas sphere and any other spheres that may develop. Harsh toke. But in 1987, nobody was stopping the party.
In the second set, Bertha Greatest, Devil with the Blue Dress, Good Golly Miss Molly, Devil with the Blue Dress.
Good golly, Miss Molly, she like the ball. Good golly, Miss Molly, she like the ball. When you're rocking and a rolling, can't you hear your mama call? From the early, early morning to the early, early night, you can see Miss Molly rocking in the house of July. Good golly, Miss Molly, she like the ball. When you're rocking and a rolling, can't you hear your mama call?
I only did 5 shows in spring of '87, the 3 Hamptons to start, and then the 2 Hartford shows. Those were so hyped energetically that they had that same feeling.
Those gigs were the first East Coast shows since Jerry Garcia's miraculous recovery from his diabetic coma the previous year.
But like by the middle of the second set, almost every MSG show got to that level.
David Lemieux.
And then He's Gone, with Jerry doing one of the coolest vocal outros I've ever heard on He's Gone. He's just like, he's playing this incredible blues riff and he's singing along to it. It's got to be heard to be believed. It's that incredible. And then later in the show, I remember the Wharf Rat was just spectacular.
The Wharf Rat from the night they're releasing is extremely special. It really elevates the show.
Also worth noting, before the encore, they do an instrumental We Bid You Goodnight Out of Nowhere, which is pretty darn cool.
It comes out of the Not Fade Away clap, a wink to the song's old-time transition into Going Down the Road Feelin' Bad, using Going Down the Road's coda, the instrumental version of We Bid You Goodnight, giving nice conceptual continuity to the encore, and also acting as a prelude to Black Muddy River. I love the little half transition here. After the show, the crowd drifted back into Midtown Manhattan. Mr. Completely.
And the other thing that struck me about it, and this has only been the case with freak scenes in a couple of cities, was that when you leave and as soon as the crowd disperses into little subcomponents, it's like the city doesn't even know it's happening.
That held mostly true. Debbie Rondeau left us this story about a 90s Dead gig at the Garden.
It was the early 1990s, and we had gone to Madison Square Garden in Manhattan, New York. The show was great, of course. It was always great. After the show, we were walking back to our hotel, and we heard sirens in the background, which, of course, is not unusual. And all of a sudden, the rapid pitter-patter of feet whirled by us, and it was a naked hippie. And I could not believe what I was seeing. And there were police officers on foot chasing this guy. And they were just exhausted. You could tell that they had been chasing him for a little bit. And so these cop cars come squealing around the corner. And next thing I know, me and my boyfriend are up against a building wall. The cop cars are in front of us. And here they finally grab the guy because all he was wearing was a necklace. And they were able to grab the necklace, which slowed him down enough where they were able to grab him.
Teachable moment for aspiring naked people.
And so this poor hippie, with his head on the ground and his butt in the air and dangling in the wind for all to see. And he was just, it was incredible. And I looked down at my feet, and there was the necklace. And I have kept that necklace for over 30 years.
Others enjoyed the discreetness New York offered.
Even the first time I went to New York, I was already at the point where I was trying to change my profile to be a little lower on the road, not fly my freak flags quite so high, and not be the slowest antelope in the herd. And the fact that you could go to New York with all these crazy freaks and all this shit going on and no one cared was great. It was just a seamless part of the city. Very, very unique to me at that point, and welcome.
Just another freak in the freak kingdom, as Hunter S. Thompson once wrote about L.A. Just don't be the naked guy. Or don't wear a necklace. There were post-show options. After all, it was New York. Johnny Dwork told us this story during our In and Out of the Garden episodes.
And then I should say that when you were done with the Dead show at Madison Square Garden, naturally you'd have the munchies. And there were a couple of places in New York that were infamous for post-Madison Square Garden food adventures. And one of them was Woe Hop Noodle Shop on, I think it was Mott Street in Chinatown. And they were open late into the night. And it was this greasy wok place that you had to walk downstairs into the basement to. But they stayed open late, and they had really, really, really great chow fun. And sure enough, you'd like take a taxi from Madison Square Garden down to Chinatown, and you would be completely surrounded by deadheads. And I remember being amazed because the first time that I went there after a Madison Square Garden show, Mickey Hart is sitting there. And I like it, it was the sort of seating family style where like the seats are not separated, right? Everybody sort of sits together. And so there was just as good a chance that you'd be seated right next to Mickey Hart as not. And nobody made a big deal of it. And everybody was high, and everybody was munching out on really good, greasy Chinese food. And I think to this day, Woe Hop still is a thing.
Being Madison Square Garden, shows ended pretty early, at least by Manhattan time. And you could always go see more music. Some years, you might even run into a member of the Dead. Gary Lambert told us this story during one of our recent Philcast episodes.
Twice on consecutive years, McCoy Tyner's yearly residency at the club called Sweet Basil occurred during the Dead Garden run. And Phil and I hopped in the car right after a Dead show and went down to catch McCoy's late set. One year with Brent, and then sadly the next year Brent was gone, and the next year it was with Bruce and Vince. And seeing these keyboardists just like with jaws dropping, watching McCoy play was really a glorious thing to behold.
By the later 80s and 90s, heads could reliably escape to the Wetlands Preserve in Tribeca, a deadhead safe space if ever one existed. Peace to Larry Block. David Lemieux's first trip to Manhattan was pretty quick.
I returned home on the 17th, got home, watched The Dead. I watched Bob and Jerry on Letterman doing When I Paint My Masterpiece, levitating Jerry, the whole bit.
Please don't hurt me,
Just
fellas.
two fingers
Please.
like this.
Two fingers, yeah. Do you hypnotize him or anything? Or
Now lift him up.
This is not going to work.
Yeah, well, here you see. Okay, now put him down.
And Letterman said, so you guys are at the Garden, you're playing a 5-night run, you're 2 into it. How you playing?
How are you playing down there?
Not bad.
Okay, good.
And I was yelling at the TV. I said, what are you talking about? I just saw you last night. You played incredibly well. I was 16, but I mean, Jerry would know better.
Boston Garden and Madison Square Garden had a lot of similarities. In fact, the original name of Boston Garden was Boston Madison Square Garden. Sorry, Bostonians. Conceived in 1928 as a sister garden for the New York venue's third iteration. David Lemieux.
Boston Garden, we thought about a lot of things. A lot of the best shows from earlier years have been released, 74, 77. In the 70s is when they were alternating between Boston Music Hall and Boston Garden, sometimes in the same year. And then they took a big hiatus after 82, I guess. They took 9 years off and didn't return until 91 to the Boston Garden.
That was another parallel between the two gardens. Just as the Dead moved to the Meadowlands for a few years in the 80s, they also did time at the Worcester Centrum. But in the years after Touch of Grey, they were forced to take any big room they could get, especially in the Northeast.
Everybody who went, they said what they loved about it was all the nooks and crannies. Because 90, the Dead start playing the Knickerbocker in Albany, and it's a perfect bowl. Every seat is a perfect sightline to the hockey rink. Just a perfect bowl. Whereas the Boston Garden is very angular, and it's a lot of like little overhangs. And because of the overhangs, even though it was small, it was, I think, 14,000 versus your normal 18. But because of the overhangs, it even felt smaller.
The shows there in 1991 especially were memorable, with the September 25th gig making it to the original run of Dick's Picks in 2000, only the second complete show from the 90s to be released.
Wolf came in, I got my car, we sat down for a game. Got my deck to the Queen of Spades, but the cards were all the same. Don't murder me, I beg you, don't murder me. Please don't murder me.
The Boston Garden show on Enjoying the Ride from October 3rd, 1994, is an even rarer bird in the Dead's catalog, marking only the second complete release from that year, along with a gig from earlier that same run. David Lemieux.
This is a very accessible show. It's a very good listening experience, both in terms of the performance and the sound quality.
Maybe it's 'cause it's midnight, the dark of the moon beside. Maybe the dark is from your eye. 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 You know you got such dark eyes.
Earlier in 1994, John Cutler replaced Dan Healy as the band's front-of-house engineer.
Cutler came on board in March of 94. Very different sound, slightly more mono at times, very stereo, but slightly more consolidated sound. But the clarity of John's mixes, I find to be the best. And I love Healy's mixes, but in terms of clarity, listening experience, I just love it.
Offers a full spectrum of the best of the 1994 Grateful Dead, including the first officially released version of Childhood's End, with words and music by Phil Lesh, which they'd started playing in summer 1994, the final original Dead song to debut.
When I was huffing freight and making payments on the farm,
You between the angels and the deep blue sea. You were running, laughing, growing, sheltered from the storm. And of the day the moon would set you free. To dream this siren song so sweet and wild.
I remember talking to him 20 years ago, and I said, "Hey, you had this big flurry of new songs, 3 new songs at the in the 90s." And he said he just was feeling very inspired again to write songs again. I remember him telling me, he said the one song he wished had developed more and was Childhood's End. So I'm happy to have that to be the one that's on here. It's such a good song.
River runs deep, river runs slow, get a little restless, wanna see some waves flow. River runs low, river runs deep, it always gets to me, round about this time of year.
I think everything Phil ever did was very different from anything Phil ever did.
For a whole lot more Phil, don't forget to check out our recent Philcasts. Phil actually gets 2 songs in the band's first set. Box of Rain had the same arrangement as the studio version, now with a bit more MIDI.
Walk into splendid sunlight, it's the way to dare dream to another land. Maybe you're tired and broken your tongue. It's just a different words have spoken and thoughts unclear. What do you want me to do for you, to see you through? A box of rain will ease the pain and love will see you through.
You get a little taste of Bobby playing the acoustic on this one. Bobby in 93, 94, 95, generally every show played acoustic on something. So you never knew what it would be. It could be Black-Throated Wind, it could be El Paso. So we get a nice little dose of the weird country stuff here.
A black-throated wind, whispering sin, speaking of life that passes like dew. Force me to see you done better by me, done better by me than I've done by you.
Obviously, because of course, Gary Lambert was there for some of the run.
I think I did go up to Boston for at least 1 or 2 of them. Shows at that point were a bit of a crapshoot, I guess you could say, and how present Jerry was going to be and all that. But I remember some really spectacular moments from Boston. Even when Jerry was visibly struggling, the rest of the band was always very present, and they were always ready to play. And then on the nights where Jerry was up to it, some pretty special stuff could happen.
There were some great flashes of late period dead jamming, including a conversational bird song that gets pretty gnarly. The second set opens with a long shakedown street, filled with gaudy Martian funk. When I'm listening to MIDI-era Dead shows, my ears leap for the drums and space sections, which, by the 1990s, often sound like studio creations when listening to the soundboard tapes. And this tape is no exception. There are nearly 30 minutes of drums and space zones tonight. Another recent Dead development was the arrival of in-ear monitors, which had a lovely effect on the band's vocals. I'll note as well that the teleprompters didn't come until slightly later.
When I had no wings to fly, you flew to me. You to me, to me.
October 3rd, 1994 would be the Dead's last show at Boston Garden. And though the venue was already scheduled for demolition, they were scheduled to return in fall 1995. It was also the end of the road for what was unquestionably a classic Grateful Dead song, and one that stretched all the way back.
Well, this job I got is a little too hard. You talk about your money, Lord, I need some pay. Gonna get up in the morning, pack my case, gonna beat it on down the line.
Oftentimes, the Dead's drummers would count out the day of the month during the song's intro. Tonight, for the last of 346 known versions, counting Mother McCree's Uptown Jug Champions but not counting studio takes or sound checks, according to Jerry Bass's most recent count, they opt for the traditional arrangement from their 1967 debut album, 5 beats and then go. Sorta.
Well, this job I got is a little too hard. Well, I have the money, Lord, I need more pay. Gonna wake up in the morning, Lord, I'm gonna pack my bag. Gonna beat it all down the line.
Which is how we're gonna go today too, with the Dead beating it on down the line one final time.
Thank you very much for tuning in to this episode of the Good Old Grateful Deadcast. We would like to thank our guests in this episode, David Lemieux, Ron Rakow, Sam Cutler, Richie Pechner, Allan Arkush, Ned Lagin, Gary Lambert, Blair Jackson, Stanley Krippner, Rebecca Adams, Johnny Dwork, John Scher, Michael Simmons, Tyler Roy-Hart, Henry Kay, Howie Levine, Kenny Schiff, and Debbie Rondeau. Extra special thanks to friend of the Deadcast, David Gans, for your ongoing contributions of audio from your most excellent interview archive. Executive producer for the Good Old Grateful Deadcast, Mark Pincus. Produced for Rhino Entertainment by Rich Mahan Promotions and Jesse Jarno. Special thanks to David Lemieux, Brian Dodd, and Doran Tyson. All rights reserved.